edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cheers to Careers. I am Steve Ridinghouse, the Career and Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today we are joined by KU alum Kelly Conkright, the founder at the Brand Terminal. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Steve.
I believe you are my first guest from LA. We finally made the virtual road trip to LA. How's life in LA?
Woo! Life in LA is great. It's a sunny day. I'm living by the beach and I have a little ocean of the water. So I'm feeling good. We've had a ton of rain this year, which we needed, but the sun is shining, and you'd be surprised because you guys might already know, but there are a ton of KU people here. There's like, when KU games are on, it's just hundreds and hundreds of people.
And I know you spent some time on the KU campus not too long ago, like a couple of weeks ago, I think during spring break. How was that trip back to Lawrence?
Yeah, well, because of you, I had a really wonderful visit. I was very inspired, very nostalgic. I've been back to KU quite a bit for, KU basketball games and whatnot. And my good friend who I played high school basketball with is the assistant athletic director there, Angie Creeters. So it's funny because it's not like I haven't been back to KU. I'm 46 now, which saying that out loud sounds weird for me. I still feel like the same person I was when I went there. So I've been back, but this time when I went back and visited you, Steve, and visited the KU Journalism School, spent time on campus with you and some other people, honestly, I was nostalgic and I was inspired, and the kids were on spring break. So is pretty peaceful, and I got choked up. I totally got choked up, and it made me think of like when I was in school, it was the 90s. So I graduated in 1999. And when I was in school, and maybe the kids will know this today because like the 90s fashion style is back, but it was like, we were doing hacky sacks on campus. It was the first time in my life I went to coffee shops. So I was like envisioning what I used to do on campus with all that, wearing Birkenstocks, but now everybody's wearing Birkenstocks again anyway. And I just remember like when I was in school, I graduated in 1999, and we were all scared the world was going to end. Steve, do you remember Y2K scare?
Yes.
Okay, so like we lived through that, and now the kids today think Y2K is a fashion style. But like we lived through that, and yeah, I was just like, I was really inspired when I came back, and I'm at this point in my life, in my career, and I told you this, where I really want to give back to the people and the entities that gave to me, and KU was one of those huge experiences of my life that made an impact. And I'm finally at that point where, and I wish I would have gotten there earlier, to be honest with you, but I was on my journey, and now I'm finally at a place where I want to give back to KU and to the students and to my alma mater. So it's fun for me.
So what was the inspiration for the Brand Terminal? I know you really focus on personal brand development. I know that's a passion of yours. I mean, what inspired you to create this organization?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I have a creative agency. It's called the Brand Terminal. That I'm the founder and the chief brand strategist of the Brand Terminal. And I started it about 6-7 years ago. And so I know after we talk about Brand Terminal, I can tell you about my journey and what led me there. But the Brand Terminal is where we launch and grow brands. So they can be, startup companies, or it can be big companies that want to rebrand or launch new products. So anything from brand strategy to branding to messaging to content. And the name of my agency is inspired by my love of travel. So Steve, as you and I know, like I've really traveled and lived and worked all across the world. And so the Brand Terminal was inspired by my love of travel. And so my tagline is where brands take off. And the whole branding is about kind of it looking like an airport terminal, so it's this idea of inspiration and going places and blue sky thinking. I have blue in my branding, and blue ocean strategy. And whenever I traveled throughout the world, I was always inspired the most when I traveled. So observing people, observing insights, different cultural nuances, design sensibilities. I just felt like I got so much inspiration from travel. So I called my company the Brand Terminal because of that. And ultimately, the vision is to be a hub for all things building and to have different terminals around the world. So, as you said, I'm in Los Angeles. We have our main hub here in LA because this is where I live. And so far, I've also launched little hubs, not the base, but little hubs in Melbourne, Australia, and also Paris, France. And so, you mentioned personal development. And so it's really, we do branding for businesses, but now we also do branding for people. Yeah.
So is this something that just kind of developed over time, or did you have what was your plan, your dream when Kelly graduated from KU in 1999? Did you know what you wanted to do right away?
So that's an interesting question. When I graduated KU, I definitely did not know what I was going to do. Because I went to, the William Allen White School of Journalism, which I was very proud of, I knew I would get into something related to business communications. So I ended up, and I had internships. I had 3 different internships, tried PR, tried a few different things, but I went into advertising. So I only knew 2 things. I knew I wanted to make money because at that time, being a digital nomad or a freelancer didn't exist.
Right.
So I knew I wanted to make money working at, a big company. And I knew I wanted to see the world. And so again, I feel like nowadays you can kind of go see the world and be a freelancer or a creator. And at the time, that wasn't an option. So I knew if my goal was to see the world, I would have to do it through companies. And that's exactly what I did.
And you just got back from a recent trip too, overseas,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yeah. So I just got back from Bali, which is in Indonesia. And I got asked to go to Bali to give my 4-hour workshop on how to build your personal brand. And I did that for a global retreat company. And I was telling you before that I have this observation going out throughout my life that everywhere I go in the world, China, Costa Rica, Germany, wherever, I always see KU people. And I used to have a question to my friends that went to Michigan or Connecticut or wherever. I'm like, oh, well, wherever you are in school, you must think that you see Connecticut people or Michigan people or everywhere you go. So I asked my friends who didn't go to KU, do you feel like you see people from your college wherever you go in the world? And they said, no, but we do see KU people everywhere we go. And so I was just in Bali in this tiny village called Ubud in the middle of the rice fields. And walking down a cobblestone street, I saw a woman with a KU hat on. And of course I gave her the really loud rock chalk Jayhawk shout out. And she gave that back to me. And I just think it's because KU people are really proud and they wear their merchandise everywhere they go. So who's ever running the merchandise program, I feel like they're doing an excellent job.
And I know when you visited here during spring break, I told you about the class I teach, professional development. We talk about personal brand too. Do you have kind of that, is there a perfect definition for a personal brand, or is it too hard to really define?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So a lot of people, first of all, there are different angles to personal branding, just like there's different angles to anything anyone does. So sometimes I think when people think of personal branding, they think, oh, that means you want to be a creator or an influencer. So it must be your TikTok or your Instagram. My version of personal branding is not that, because with a brand, the first thing you have to do is define, what a brand is, who you are, what you stand for, what your key message is, what your visual world is, what you want, what your North Star is, what you're positioning. So it's the same stuff that you do for a regular brand as what you do for yourself. After you've defined your brand, and in this case, yourself as a brand, then you can go into activating or marketing. And so I think of Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn or any of those things as a marketing channel. So I'm not saying personal branding isn't your Instagram, but what I am saying is that Instagram is a channel. And depending on what your personal brand is, you choose your channel. Like if you're, an athlete or a politician, maybe Twitter is the right social channel for you. If you're in fashion or, you know, something that's more visual, maybe Instagram's your channel. For me, I do work with a lot of founders and executives to build their personal brand, and therefore I'll start using LinkedIn as one of my marketing channels. So again, you know, personal branding is a lot of stuff in terms of who are you? What are you about? What do you stand for? What do you want? How do you stand out and position yourself? How do you show up? And then in terms of activating and marketing yourself and your message, that then and only then can you go into a channel. So for an example, I talk to a lot of people about what is your key message. Like if you have a passion, you want to share something with the world, first start with like overarching, what is your key message? And then for social media, you can break that out into content themes. So my message to the world and what I feel like I'm an expert in is I believe that branding is everything and everything is a brand. So Steve, I think one of the other things I talk about is, you know, we are all already a brand, whether we think about it or not. And I don't know if anyone's actually ever talked about it like that. So I believe that even if you don't have a job or a corporate job or a freelance job, like my sister's a stay-at-home mom, one of the smartest stay-at-home moms I've ever met in my entire life, but she doesn't work because her husband travels a lot and she is staying home with the kids. She's a brand. Like we're all already a brand. We're all already putting stuff out into the world every day of our lives that give people cues as to who we are, what we stand for, and what we kind of want to get back. And so you know how there's that common saying, your vibe attracts your tribe, or like attracts like, or if anybody read that book, The Secret, like 10 years ago, The Secret was all about like, put out into the universe what you're about and see what comes back. So personal branding is also kind of like that. It's go ahead and put out into the universe what you're about so that you can attract the right people that are also interested in what you have to offer. So I don't know, it's really a lot of things.
No, yeah, well said. And how
And
close?
how does that relate to, I know you have a curriculum where you help kids prepare for their careers. And I noticed one of your first classes is titled Personal Branding.
Yeah, no, we kind of talk about, yeah, like what you stand for, your values, and kind of like what values you can bring to the workplace. Always encourage kids to think in those terms, like when they apply for a job. I mean, be thinking about what you can provide to that company. So yeah, we do focus on personal brand. I mean, we could probably spend all semester talking about it, but I think students enjoy having that discussion to figure out what they are about. And another thing we always say, your personal brand can evolve over time. I mean, don't feel like your brand is set when you're 22 years old. It definitely takes on different forms. And how close
well,
is...
Can I actually comment on that really quick? Because I think you hit on a really, really important point. When I was giving my workshop in Bali, I was giving it to a lot of very, very successful people between the ages of 22 and 60. And there were two people in the group that were very nervous about personal branding because they didn't want to be put in a box.
Right.
And exactly, Steve, to your point, the idea is not to just say you have to be one thing. It's to say, hey, you're going to have a lot of chapters in your life and you're going to evolve over time. And that's exactly what you should do. But what are the common threads that hold together kind of some of your basic, you know, values? So it's definitely that you can and should evolve. I love that quote by Albert Einstein. Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. So if you don't keep moving, you actually start to get stale or fail. So the idea is definitely to keep moving. And then one other thing I wanted to say about that is so I give a speech in the last year. I've been giving the speech to different organizations around how to build your personal brand. And I've started to say in that speech, and this is not to be taken exactly what I'm going to say. So I'll describe this, but I say the resume is dead and personal branding is everything. So I say that to get a reaction. You still need a resume and you still need your LinkedIn. So I say that with a grain of salt. So you still need that. You still need your resume and LinkedIn. But your resume isn't everything. And the reason I say that is because we're not one-dimensional people, right? So like your resume sometimes can read as a set of facts, and here's your experience, and here's what you've done, and here's your degree, and here's your internships, and here's what you did in high school, you know, whatever. But actually, we're two-dimensional, three-dimensional people, right? Like actually three-dimensional. And so it's everything about what's your visual world? How do you organize information? How do you show up online in meetings with your friends, with your coworkers? Maybe you work at a restaurant. How do you show up at the restaurant that you're working at? Like, we're three-dimensional people. So what I am encouraging people to do at any age, whether you're a recent college graduate or whether you're going into retirement and what do you want for that next chapter of your life, I encourage everyone to have a website. And that sounds annoying for some people, but I believe that in the future, everyone will have a website, and that can show your full self. So it's, what are you into? Show the visuals. How do you organize information? What's your favorite quote? What's your favorite mantra? What are some testimonials of people that interact with you, friends, family, coworkers? And so I think maybe, Steve, when we have a conversation together in 5 years from now, hopefully I'll be spot on with that. And even if it's a one-page website, I think it'll be pretty important for the future.
And Kelly, when you decided, you know, you kind of started out in Kansas City, that's where you grew up. Traveling, was that a big leap for you, or was that pretty natural? I mean, were you always comfortable traveling?
Yeah, I mean, so that is an interesting question. I feel like my dad encouraged us to travel when we were young, but it was very much like road trips in America. Oh, you know, we were very middle class. I grew up in Lenexa, Kansas. And I just always, I think when I studied abroad, the KU School of Journalism helped me to study abroad in London. So it was, I don't know if you guys still have this exact one, but it's the Richmond School,
Okay.
which is the American school in London. And instead of satiating my desire for travel, it actually just like made me thirstier. And so it kind of set the path for my life in this trajectory. And I remember, in order to study abroad in London, maybe times have gotten easier. I literally had 3 jobs in college, and I was in a sorority. And funny enough, I think after KU, even though the sorority house gave me so much, I think I was a little embarrassed by it. Like, oh, is that cliche that I was in a sorority? And then funny enough, I traveled the world and I was dating this British guy, and they're so fascinated by American sorority and fraternity life. He was all, darling, tell me all about this thing called a sorority. You know, because they only see about it on movies and TV shows. So like I would tell him about sorority life and KU life. And, you know, I just think that if you have a curious mind, you can kind of do anything. So if you're humble and you're curious about other cultures, you can do anything. So my path was, I studied in London in college. Then I got a job in Kansas City for a year at Barclay Evergreen and Partners, where I was an account coordinator, and it was amazing. We had a great culture. I worked my booty off. But I always knew that it was to gain experience and then go and do more things. So I moved to LA. I worked at Saatchi and Saatchi, as a global ad agency network. I worked on the Lexus account, and I traveled all over the world doing photo shoots for Lexus. And then, so that was lucky. That was like a lucky accident. Then I worked with the TBWA network, which is also one of the biggest global ad agency networks in the world, and also the Integer Group based out of Colorado. So after I launched Blue Moon Beer on behalf of Coors Brewing Company and Integer, we won a bunch of awards. We had a great time together doing that. And I think that solidified my agency, allowing me to go help them open up the European office in Paris. So then I worked and lived in Paris for 3 years and worked on global accounts. And so really traveled a lot of the world, including Europe. Then after Paris, I helped open up our New York office for that same international agency network. And then after New York, I kind of got this entrepreneur bug, which I didn't even really know much about at the time, because I'd always been an intrapreneur. So by the way, I don't know if you talk to your students about this at all, but something I've recently really been able to articulate and define for myself, which I had never really done until the last year, is for most of my career, I was an intrapreneur. So I worked at big companies, but I did special projects within those big companies. And so I didn't really understand that about myself, but my bosses must have understood that I had an entrepreneurial spirit because they always put me in these different roles. And then after I was an entrepreneur at these big companies for a long time, then I transitioned to being an entrepreneur. And so I did several things before I started my own agency, which we can talk about if you'd like to. But then after that, I moved to Stockholm, Sweden, and I started a tech startup, a tech company. After that, I moved back to LA and started my agency. And then, of course, you know, from there have been traveling. We have the hubs in Melbourne, Australia. We have the hubs in Paris. Now I'm traveling, like I said, to Bali and different places to give my speech. So it's just one of those things where you might have a plan, and having a plan and a North Star is amazing. But then I think when life happens and stuff happens to you, you kind of like roll with it and go with it. And you almost like can't plan everything out, because a lot of the stuff that happened in my life shaped me, and I didn't really know about that.
So like with your various positions and places of work, I mean, did you always know it's time to move on? I mean, or did you kind of strategically think, I want to acquire this skill, spend a couple of years here and then move on? Or did you just kind of roll with it, like you said?
That is a really good question that I haven't been asked before. There's a lot of times.
I know you used the word stale earlier. It sounds like you don't like to get stale. So
I guess for me personally, and I think it's different for everybody, is I'm usually ready to move on sooner than I'm ready to move on. So I remember working on Blue Moon, and I worked on Blue Moon for 3 years. And I remember 2 years in, I really wanted to switch accounts and work on other accounts. And my bosses convinced me, you know, you're crushing it on Blue Moon. This is a big deal. Stay on the account for 1 more year. And I did, and it really changed everything for me. I think that like a lot of times you might have this idea in your head about what you want to do, but I think maybe more experience or more preparations in store before you're ready. So I think that like for me, a common thread is I'll have an inkling of an idea of what I want to do next, but then I hold it and start working towards it before I blow everything up. And so, but that's happened like many, many times. So for an example, I knew 5 years ago I wanted to do personal branding, but I didn't really start doing it until 1 year ago. So I've been percolating. I've been really thinking through it, writing notes, you know, studying the industry. I love psychology. I love self-development. And it wasn't until the time was right that I sort of pounced on it and really went for it, because I don't think I had carved my path yet for it. So I think that's a common thread for me now. I think about it, that I have something in mind, but then I kind of prepare for it before I actually do it. So for an example, I spent literally 25 years building brands, but my deep love and passion is psychology and self-growth. But here I am, I've been in advertising and branding and in shopper marketing. And so who am I to do anything in personal development? But actually, who am I? Because I've spent my entire personal life studying psychology and personal development. And during COVID, I remember during COVID, everyone was making banana bread, dancing to TikTok, binging on Tiger King. I don't know if you watched, Steve, did you do any of those things during COVID?
I did not. No. I did some baking, but I didn't make banana bread. So.
What did you make?
I was making some awesome casseroles. So.
Ooh, everybody started cooking. I love it. So I was watching everybody do this, like baking, right? Cooking and binging and Tiger King and all this kind of stuff. And what I was doing was I was literally binging masterclass and synthesizing all the common threads of what make the most successful people in the world. And then I was also binging these TED Talks around the science of happiness, the science of, self-growth, I started studying positive psychology and what that means. And so if you really dig into not what somebody does, but who they really are at their core, who I really am at my core is someone who really believes in self-development and personal growth. And there was a long time I felt like that was maybe that could be considered selfish. Like, I'm really so curious about myself and self-realization and, what I'm all about. But I actually now think it's the exact opposite. I think that if you have the curiosity to think about who you are really and to develop yourself, I feel like it's actually in service to everybody around you. That whole thing about like on the plane, they always teach you put your mask on first before you put it on your child. And that's counterintuitive, but it's like help yourself first so that you can help everyone around you. I think personal development is exactly putting the mask on first. So if you get happy yourself, then you raise your own vibration. Then you're going to raise the vibration of everyone around you, and you're going to inspire everyone around you. And like for me, it's this tornado effect of then you inspire a bigger group and then a bigger group. And then if more people get happy and feel like they're working in their passions and are their sweet spot, then the world moves forward. So I think about it in like a really big, deep, inspiring way.
And Kelly, when did you know the timing was right to start your own agency? Did you feel like you had it all figured out, or have you learned a lot throughout the process?
Oh, wow. I can't believe I'm going to actually tell you the real story about this, but it wasn't that I planned that out forever. It was that I was doing a lot of work for a lot of other people after I left the big corporate world. And I got burned a few times. I had never been burned before in my whole life, but when I entered the entrepreneurial world, it was wild, crazy, and I wasn't ready for it yet. And I got burned by a few people, and I thought, and then my family was like, well, why don't you just start your own thing? Why don't you just start an LLC? And I was sitting at the kitchen counter one day with my stepdad, and I was like, I have literally no way to do that. So yeah. And he was like, here, I'll show you. It's really easy. And we did it within 15 minutes.
Awesome.
And then it was crazy. And then it started this whole snowball effect where I was like, oh, so it's mine. So I get to name it, and I get to decide who I work with, and I get to decide like what kind of clients I want. And honestly, the journey was hard. Like it was this real roller coaster of up and down and up and down and up and down. So I think being an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur, and I was able to weather that roller coaster and that storm. And then I got to a place where I fell in love with the journey of it all. Like I will never forget sending to a guy friend of mine in college this poem about how life is about the journey, not the destination. And now here I am at this age thinking that's exactly what I now think of life is if you can enjoy the journey, then that's kind of the key to it all. So in order to succeed with my agency, I had to fall in love with the journey because it's a really difficult journey. And there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows. And when I think about my life, I've had a lot more lows than I thought, but I've had a lot more highs than I thought. And that's, I guess, kind of the thing.
No, great tip. Hey, I know I've taken a lot of your time, and I love what you said about enjoy the journey. I think that's a great close to the session. So Kelly, again, I appreciate joining us virtually. I always like to say cheers to our alums' careers. And yeah, you're doing amazing work since you've graduated. And I know I got to meet you personally a couple of weeks ago and got familiar with your story. So again, thanks for sharing, Kelly.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. Rock Chalk Jayhawk.